My son said I was a burden, so I emptied his bank account and left a note. He'll never forget that my son called me a burden. He said it right in front of his wife after I asked about a small medical bill. Maybe he forgot that this burden sold her memory-filled home and deposited over $300,000 into a joint account just to make his life a little easier. So I decided to show him what a real burden looks like. I withdrew every last penny, not a dime left behind, and I left a note I knew he'd never forget. Have you ever felt like your sacrifices meant nothing? Listen to the story of how one mother took it all back. My name is Martha.
I'm 75.
Right now, I'm sitting across from a man in a suit inside the cold glass office of a bank. Not where I thought I'd be at this age. I should be home tending to my rose garden, but life doesn't always go the way we hope. Mrs. Jensen, the amount you're requesting to withdraw is significant, the manager says, all professionalism. Are you sure about this decision? I look him straight in the eye. Not a flicker of doubt. I'm more sure about this than I've ever been about anything in my life. How did I end up here? It started with good intentions. After my husband Robert passed and I sold our house, my son David convinced me to open a joint account to help take care of you, he said, so I can pay bills for you. I believed him. I placed my entire life savings, the fruits of decades of hard work, into that trust. But that care quickly turned into careless spending. It started with an overpriced patio set that Karen, my daughter-in-law, claimed was for Mom, so she can sit outside comfortably. Then came the giant curved screen TV. Dinner after dinner at fancy restaurants where the food barely made it down my throat. They spent my money and called it family expenses. And then came last night, a $200 doctor's bill. So small compared to what they'd already used. But when I handed it to David, I saw it. The irritation, the resentment. And then he said the word burden. The bank manager slides a stack of papers toward me. Please sign here, ma'am. My hands don't tremble. I'm a retired accountant. Numbers and signatures are second nature. I sign clear and firm. Martha Jensen. This isn't an act of anger. This is a closing entry, a final reconciliation. I take the cashier's check from his hand. It's more than money. It's my independence, my dignity, my future. I drive back to that house one last time. It's quiet. I pack a small suitcase, some clothes, a few books, and the notebook where I secretly recorded every expense they made. Then I sit at the kitchen table, where just yesterday I felt like an afterthought. I write a short note, slip it under the bank statement, and leave it on the table. I place the house key beside the envelope. The debt has been settled. Now it's time to begin again. They say never to mix money with emotion. I ignored that advice, and it became the greatest mistake of my life. My house on a quiet little street in Ohio had been sold. The cardboard boxes were neatly taped and stacked in the living room, each one clearly labeled in black marker, Martha Jensen's belongings. And beneath that, my new address, David's address, my son's home. I'd lived there for 40 years. My husband, Robert, had taken his final breath in the upstairs bedroom. Every corner of that house held a memory. Now, all those memories were sealed inside moving boxes. I'm a retired accountant. My life was built around clear numbers and balanced ledgers. Before moving, I spent an entire week organizing all my financial documents, bills, savings accounts, pension papers, Robert's life insurance policy. Everything filed neatly, each in its own folder. It was habit. It was my way of making a final entry, closing a chapter of my life. David came that afternoon to help with the last of the boxes. He hugged me and said, "Everything will be all right. You won't be alone anymore, Mom. You've got us now." I believed him. How could a mother not believe her only son? The next morning, David took me to the bank. In my hand was a check that represented our entire home, our entire life savings, $327,000. I intended to open a new savings account with David listed as a beneficiary. But he had a different idea. "Mom," he said as we sat before the bank clerk, "how about we open a joint account instead? It'll be so much easier. If something comes up, medical bills, repairs, I can handle it right away. No legal fuss. It's all to protect you." His reasoning made sense. It sounded thoughtful. I looked into my son's eyes, those same eyes I'd looked into since he was a child. I saw sincerity there. Or maybe that's just what I wanted to see. A faint unease brushed over me as I reached for the pen. A tiny pause, just for a second, but then I pushed it aside. This was David, my son. He wouldn't hurt me. I signed my name, Martha Jensen, right beside his, David Jensen. The bank clerk smiled and congratulated us. And just like that, a lifetime's worth of security now sat in an account that I no longer controlled alone. That first night in David's house felt strange. Karen, my daughter-in-law, was very welcoming. She'd prepared a small room for me at the end of the hallway. "We're so glad to have you here, Mom Martha," she said. Her smile was bright, but it didn't reach her eyes. The room was small and tidy. My things, the familiar objects from my old home, felt out of place here. I put away my clothes and set a few books on the desk, but I felt like a guest, a tenant. As I was about to go to bed, I heard whispers in the hallway, Karen and David's voices. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but the door didn't block sound well. "Are you sure she signed everything? Is the money in the account yet?" Karen's voice. Then David, quieter, replied, "Yeah, it's all done." "Good," she said, undeniable satisfaction in her tone. I sat frozen in the dark. Their voices faded, footsteps retreating down the hall. Slowly, I sank onto the edge of the bed. The room suddenly felt colder. That first night in the new house, I couldn't sleep. Not because the bed was unfamiliar, but because one question kept echoing in my mind. Had I just found a home or walked straight into a trap? A dam doesn't break with the first strike of a hammer. It starts with tiny cracks, ones people choose to ignore. The first few weeks passed in an artificial calm. I tried to be as invisible as possible. I'd wake up early, make my own coffee, and eat breakfast before anyone else stirred. Most of my time was spent tucked away in that small room reading or knitting. I didn't want to be a burden.
I didn't want to disturb their lives.
Karen's whisper that night still haunted me, but I kept telling myself I was just being too sensitive. The first crack came one Sunday afternoon. We were sitting in the backyard on some worn lawn chairs. Karen flipped through a home decor magazine. "Mom Martha, I think we should get a new patio set," she said sweetly. "It's summer. It would be lovely if we could all have dinner out here sometimes. You could even sit and read in the fresh air." It sounded reasonable. I nodded. "That's a nice idea, dear." A few days later, a large delivery truck pulled into the driveway. Two men hauled out a massive teakwood dining set complete with a sun umbrella and thick cream cushions. It looked expensive. That evening, the accountant in me gave in to curiosity. I opened the bank app on my tablet. A withdrawal. 25,500, memo. Outdoor furniture. I stared at that number. I didn't say a word to David, just quietly closed the app. After that, the cracks widened. David bought a large gas barbecue grill for a weekend cookout with the neighbors. "Mom," he said cheerfully. Twin son, $200. Karen came home with a designer handbag, beaming about a sale. $800. A new, even bigger TV appeared in the living room because the old one didn't have crisp colors anymore. $3,000. They never asked. They just informed me, if that, they spent my money but called it family expenses. I had become an unwilling sponsor for a lifestyle I didn't belong to. While they feasted on delivery steak dinners, I ate my simple meals alone in the kitchen. While they subscribed to expensive streaming services, I borrowed books from the library. Then came the breaking point of Friday night. "Let's all go out to eat," David announced suddenly, to celebrate 1 month with Mom living with us. And the restaurant he picked was an upscale steakhouse downtown. Elegant space, soft amber lighting, pristine white linen napkins. I felt uncomfortable.
It was far too fancy for me.
The meal was delicious, but I could barely eat. When the bill arrived, the number on it made my head spin. Over $400. Without hesitation, David pulled out the debit card, the joint account card, and handed it to the waiter. "A treat for the whole family," he repeated that familiar line. On the drive home, I couldn't stay silent. I whispered, careful not to let Karen hear. "That dinner was really expensive, sweetheart." David glanced at me in the rearview mirror, a tight smile on his lips. It's fine, Mom. Don't worry. Money's meant to be spent. His tone was so casual, as if I were being silly, as if I had no say in how my own money was being used. In that moment, it hit me. To him, the money wasn't mine anymore. It was his. That night, I didn't read. I sat in my room under the dim glow of the bedside lamp. I pulled out a hardcover notebook I'd bought the week before. I opened to the first page. With the precision of an accountant, I drew columns: date, description, amount. I opened the bank app again, and I began to write. June 12th, patio furniture, $1,500. June 20th, barbecue grill, $1,200. June 28th, Karen's handbag spent, $800. July 10th, new TV, $3,000. And finally, I logged tonight's dinner. July 15th, steakhouse dinner, $427.58. But this time, next to the number, I added a note. Not my expense. The ledger was growing. Burden. What a dreadful word. It can reduce a lifetime of love to ashes in a single moment. That evening, the air inside the house felt heavy and suffocating, just like the sweltering July heat outside in Ohio. The central AC was running at full blast, but it only seemed to deepen the silence in the living room. I sat in my usual armchair, trying to focus on the book in my lap. But my thoughts drifted. David and Karen were on the couch, each absorbed in a screen. David was scrolling his phone, and Karen was flipping through glossy pages of a magazine. We were in the same room, but it felt like an ocean stretched between us. Dinner, my simple chicken stew, had been eaten in silence. No compliments, no complaints. My presence in this house felt just like that meal, acknowledged, but not truly noticed. On the small table beside me sat a white envelope. It was from the cardiology clinic. A bill for my routine checkup. Insurance had covered most of it, but I still owed a portion. $215. Not a large sum, but enough to make me do something I had grown to dread: talk about money. I'd put it off for 2 days. I waited until a commercial came on TV. I took a deep breath, picked up the envelope, and walked over to David. David, I have this, I said softly, holding out the bill. He glanced at it, then back at his phone. Later, Mom. I'm in the middle of something. Karen lowered her magazine. She glanced at the envelope, then let out a dramatic sigh. Again, getting old is really expensive, she muttered. Not loud enough to be a scolding, but loud enough for me to hear. And I knew David heard it, too. He finally put down his phone, not to look at me, but to look at the bill. His brow furrowed. $215, he murmured. Can you maybe delay the payment a bit, Mom? This month's been a lot. A lot. I looked around the room. The giant curved TV, the new sound system, Karen's designer purse tossed on the chair, all bought with my money. But isn't this why we opened the joint account? My voice trembled. So, I wouldn't have to worry about things like medical bills? My question lit the fuse. Karen slammed the magazine down. Mom, she said, voice dripping with condescension. Do you have any idea how much the bills have gone up since you moved in? Electricity, water, groceries. We haven't complained. We're doing our best to take care of you. Take care? She said it like I was a freeloader, as if the $300,000 I'd contributed didn't exist. That money is for all of us, David cut in, irritated. He still wouldn't look at me. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. Complicated? I echoed, stunned. I just want to pay a medical bill with the money I put into that account. David's patience snapped. He shot to his feet, finally meeting my eyes, but there was no love in his gaze. Only frustration, the weariness of someone who'd been inconvenienced. Don't you get it? Everything costs money. I have to take care of Karen. This house?
My job.
Sometimes it feels like you're just a burden. Burden. The word left his lips and hung in the air, crashing down and shattering everything. Silence. The TV kept playing. Its cheerful sounds felt cruelly fake. Karen sat smugly, a flicker of triumph dancing across her face. My world collapsed without a sound. He didn't look at me with regret, only annoyance. I stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked back to my room. I didn't slam the door, just quietly closed it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my small writing desk under the dull yellow light. I didn't cry. That stage had passed. Instead, I worked. I pulled out my secret notebook, opened the banking app on my tablet, and printed the full transaction history of the joint account. Then I took a red ink pen and a ruler, and I began. Patio furniture, $2,500, David/Karen's expense. Barbecue grill, $1,200, David/Karen's expense. Steakhouse dinner, $427.50, David/Karen's expense. Methodically, without emotion, I reviewed, labeled, and categorized each transaction. I totaled all their personal spending, then subtracted it from my original deposit minus my own legitimate medical costs. At the end, I had a number, a final number, clear and precise.
I didn't cry.
I calculated, and with the cold clarity of an accountant, I knew exactly what I had to do next. A good accountant never acts on emotion. They act on numbers. And that night, the numbers gave me a very clear answer. The next morning, I woke before my alarm. I showered and dressed in a simple business outfit I used to wear to work, gray slacks and a white blouse. The uniform of seriousness, the uniform of someone with something important to do. Downstairs, David and Karen were eating breakfast in silence. They didn't look at each other. Karen was scrolling on her phone. David skimmed the sports section. The air still carried the thick tension from the night before. I said nothing, just made myself a cup of tea and a slice of toast. I ate slowly. There was no need to rush. I had the whole day ahead of me. As they got ready to leave, Karen said, still with a hint of resentment, "I'll be home late today. You'll have to sort out dinner yourself." "I know," I replied. David didn't look at me, just muttered, "Bye, Mom," and hurried out to the garage. The sound of the garage door closing was my signal. For the next few hours, the house was mine. I washed my teacup, dried it, and placed it carefully on the rack. Then I went to my room. I picked up my handbag, my secret notebook, and the neatly printed bank statements. I was ready. Sitting across from the branch manager at the bank, I felt a strange calm. The room was cool, quiet, professional, a different world from the emotional mess inside my son's house. The manager, a man about David's age, looked at me through thick glasses. "Good morning, Mrs. Jensen. How can we help you today?" "Good morning," I replied, placing my handbag on my lap. "I'd like to make a large transaction from my joint account number 7448. I laid out my documents in order. My ID, the printed bank statements, and finally my notebook. "This account is under both my name and my son's, David Jensen," I began. When we opened it, I deposited $327,000, my entire proceeds from selling my home. I slid the statement across the desk. He nodded. "In the past few months," I continued, flipping to my notes, "there have been several withdrawals from this account. I've documented them carefully." I showed him the pages, each entry labeled, each indulgence recorded. He glanced over them, expression neutral. "I've done the math," I said evenly. "David and Karen's non-essential spending totals $20,100. My legitimate medical costs add up to $1,450. After subtracting those, plus a small amount of accrued interest, the remainder is $33,450. I looked him straight in the eye. "I'd like to withdraw that full amount as a cashier's check, please." He studied the papers, didn't ask why. With a joint account, I had every right. He simply nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Jensen. Please give us a moment to process that." It took nearly an hour. I waited patiently, without a hint of anxiety. I listened to the hum of printers, keyboards, and whispered conversations. Finally, he returned, a pale blue check in hand. He passed it to me. I checked the numbers. Everything was exact. "Thank you," I said, sliding it into a safety envelope inside my bag. "It's been our pleasure, Mrs. Jensen." I returned to that house just before noon. It was quiet. I went to my room and pulled out my suitcase. I didn't have much to pack, A few outfits, some books, and the wooden recipe box that had belonged to my mother. When everything was ready, I sat at the kitchen table. I took out a blank sheet of paper and a pen. I'd thought long and hard about the note I would leave. It wouldn't be angry. It would read like a final report, the kind an accountant writes at the close of a fiscal year. I kept it short. David, you called me a burden. A burden doesn't contribute $327,000 to a family. I've taken back what's mine. Good luck with the rest. Mom. I folded the note and slid it into an envelope. Beside it, I placed a copy of my original deposit receipt and the final page of my notebook with a total circled in red. Evidence. Clear, undeniable. I left the envelope neatly centered on the dining table. Then I wheeled my suitcase to the car. Before turning the key, I sat for a long moment. My past in Ohio had ended. But what now? I opened the old contacts list on my phone, one I hadn't touched in years. I scrolled until I found the name Helen, my best friend from high school. We'd lost touch over 4 decades ago. I didn't even know if the number still worked. I took a deep breath and pressed call. It rang then.
Hello.
A voice older now, but unmistakable.
Helen, I said softly.
It's Martha. Martha Jensen. It's been a long time. A beat of silence. Then joy cracked through. Martha, oh my God, is it really you? We exchanged a few laughs, small talk, and memories. Then I got to the point. Helen, this might sound strange, but down there in Florida, would you happen to have room for one more old lady? When I hung up, a shiver ran through me. Fear, yes, but freedom, too. I didn't know what was waiting down the road. All I knew was that for the first time in months, I was behind the wheel. In one whole year in Ohio, I didn't have a single friend. But in just 1 week in Florida, I found a family. The flight from Columbus to Tampa felt like an escape. When the plane landed under the blazing Florida sun, I felt as if I had shed a heavy skin. Helen was waiting at the airport. We hadn't seen each other in over 40 years, but the moment I saw her with her short silver hair, radiant smile, and that enthusiastic wave, it felt like not a single day had passed. We hugged, not saying a word, but the embrace carried a whole lost youth between us. The retirement community where Helen lived was unlike anything I'd imagined. It wasn't some dreary nursing home. It was a never-ending resort. Charming pastel-painted cottages, manicured lawns, swaying palms. There was a golf course, a sparkling pool glinting in the sun, and a lively clubhouse always buzzing with laughter. The air smelled different, not the stifling stillness of Ohio, but the salty breath of the sea and the sweet scent of hibiscus. I stayed in Helen's sunlit guest room. She gave me a grand tour. That's the book club, Tuesdays. She pointed to a group of women deep in discussion. Over there's watercolor class Thursdays, and out by the pool, water aerobics almost every morning. Everyone I met smiled and said hello. Welcome to the Villages, they'd say. No one asked where I came from. No one asked why I was there. They simply accepted me. In the early days, I still carried the quiet caution of someone used to shrinking into corners. But Helen wouldn't allow it. Come on, Martha, she said. There's a Latin dance class today. You're not spending the rest of your life hiding inside. I hadn't danced since Robert was alive. But when the salsa music kicked in and Helen pulled me onto the floor, I found myself smiling. A real smile, not forced. I joined the book club. For the first time in years, I could speak my thoughts on a novel without being cut off. People listened.
They challenged me.
They agreed with me. Most importantly, they respected me. I joined the painting class. I hadn't held a brush since high school. But as I blended those first watercolors onto paper, I felt a creative joy I hadn't felt in decades. Here, I wasn't David's mother. I wasn't a burden. I was Martha, a woman who loved Jane Austen and painting wildflowers. Piece by piece, I was rediscovering myself. Then one afternoon, Helen and I were sipping iced tea on the porch when the call came. The one I knew would come sooner or later. An unknown number, Ohio area code. My heart sped up, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I motioned to Helen and picked up. Hello, Mom. David's voice burst through, not with concern, but with panic and anger. Where are you? What did you do? You drained the account. All of it. Karen is losing her mind. She says we're going to go bankrupt. How could you just leave like that without saying a word? How could you do this to me?
He went on and on.
Not a single question about whether I was safe, how I was living, if I was okay. It was all about one thing: money, the numbers on a bank statement. I let him finish. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end. Is that all you called for, David? I asked, calm and steady. Just about the money? His silence was all the answer I needed. In that quiet pause, everything became crystal clear. I had made the right choice. There was no guilt left in me, only a strange, beautiful peace. I'm busy, I said, voice calm. Have a nice day. And I hung up. I was busy living my own life. As an accountant, I know every account must be reconciled at the end of a period. And the emotional account between my son and me was no exception. 6 months had passed since David's last phone call. 6 months of silence, 6 months of freedom. Last week, Helen rented a convertible and we drove along the coast to a small town called Cedar Key. The sea breeze whipped through my silver hair, and for the first time in years, I felt a pure, unburdened joy. We walked barefoot along the beach, letting the small waves kiss our feet. I hadn't done that since Robert was alive. See, I told you you'd love it, Helen laughed, handing me a strawberry ice cream cone. I took it and paid for both with my own money. The freedom to spend on a simple joy without needing to explain or feel guilty was strange and sweet. That sweetness became a part of my new life in Florida. My life had taken shape. I no longer lived in Helen's guest room. I used a portion of my money to rent a charming little apartment within the same retirement community. It overlooked a small lake where I watched white herons stroll every morning. I decorated the space myself. Watercolor paintings I'd created in art class hung on the walls. My bookshelf was filled with novels from book club. And best of all, no one here told me what I should do or how I should feel. Each day was pleasantly full. Mornings with Helen at water aerobics, lunch at the clubhouse with new friends, afternoons reading on the porch. I volunteered at the local library, helping to shelve books. I found Martha again, the woman I'd lost somewhere in the years of being a wife, a mother, and a so-called burden. Then one afternoon, while checking my email, I saw one from David. The subject line was a single word: talk. My heart didn't race. I only felt calm. This was one last entry in my emotional ledger, and it needed to be closed. I replied simply. I agreed to meet, but in Florida at the Clubhouse Cafe, time and place on my terms. He came the following week. When I saw David walk into the cafe, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner, worn, deep lines carved into his forehead. Gone was the smugness of a self-assured middle-aged man. He sat across from me and ordered a black coffee. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," he said, his voice rough. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied. "Very well." Silence hung between us. Finally, he met my gaze. "Mom, I'm really sorry for everything, for what I said, for what I didn't say. I was a terrible son." This time, there was no defense, just the raw taste of regret. "Karen and we've separated," he admitted, his voice softer. "When the money was gone, everything fell apart. Turns out our foundation wasn't as solid as we thought." He talked about the financial struggles, about possibly selling the house in Ohio. Not to gain sympathy, but as a confession. And then came what I knew was coming. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mom," he said, eyes cast down. "I'm not here to beg, but if you could help us one last time." I listened until he finished. Then I took a sip of my tea. "I've already helped you, David," I said calmly. "I gave you over $300,000. You spent it on cars, TVs, restaurants, and when I asked for $200 for a doctor's bill, you called me a burden." David looked down. He had no argument. "I've also written my will," I continued. "I want you to know so you can let go of any expectations. The bulk of my estate will be donated to the public library and the local animal shelter here. I want to leave something behind for the community that welcomed me when I had nowhere else to go." I opened my purse and pulled out my checkbook. This was my new account in my name alone. I carefully wrote a check. There was some interest left in our joint account after I withdrew. I've closed that account. This is your share. I slid the check across the table. The amount was exact, down to the last cent, $4,275. Consider it a parting gift, I said. From now on, you'll need to stand on your own. He looked at the check, then at me. In his eyes, I saw a late understanding. For the first time, he truly saw me. Not as a mother, not as a burden, but as a woman. A woman with her own ledger. And finally, our account was balanced. 3 years have passed since I drove away from Ohio with a check in my purse and an empty heart. Today, I am Martha Jensen, 78 years old, sitting in a sun-drenched office at the clubhouse of the Villas retirement community in Florida. In front of me is a bitter ledger filled with red ink, but the balance spreadsheet for our community's annual charity fund. As a volunteer treasurer, I'm reviewing the numbers before this afternoon's meeting. Around me, laughter, the soft clatter of dominoes, and swing music drifting from the dance class next door. This is my life now, a life filled with meaningful numbers and sincere relationships. Every now and then, the book club coordinator stops by with a quick question about the fund. Mr. Miller from the gardening club brings me a basket of cherry tomatoes he just harvested. Here, I'm not a burden. I'm Miss Martha, who's great with books. I'm Martha, who gives good advice about growing bougainvilleas. I'm known for who I am and what I can do. My friendship with Helen has only grown stronger. We have a tradition now. Every Friday afternoon, we drive out to the beach and sit on a bench watching the sunset. We don't talk much. Just share a quiet peace. A silence so different from the stifling quiet in David's house all those years ago. This silence is one of understanding, of contentment. My only remaining tie to Ohio comes once a year, a Christmas card. This year's card arrived just last week. It wasn't printed on fancy paper like Karen used to prefer. It was simple, something from a corner drugstore. Inside was a photo. David looked older, more gray in his hair, but his smile seemed at peace. Karen wasn't in the picture. His handwriting was brief. Mom, wishing you a peaceful Christmas. Karen and I sold the house in Columbus and moved into a smaller apartment. I've started a new job. Less stress. For the first time in years, I'm debt-free. I hope you're happy. I'm learning how to be. I read that card more than once. No requests, no blame. Just a sincere update. I didn't feel smug, only a gentle sadness for my son. He had to lose nearly everything to learn the value of independence. I didn't reply, not out of anger, but because I knew that chapter was truly closed. That account had been reconciled. My silence now is an endurance. It's a boundary I chose. And respect. All my life as an accountant, I saw the world in assets and liabilities, in investments and returns. I once considered my love for David to be a no-strings investment, an asset that didn't need a return. But I was wrong. Every investment needs a return, even the smallest one. The return on love isn't money.
It's respect.
It's gratitude. When my investment yielded only disregard and cruel words, it became a bad debt, one that dragged my emotional balance sheet into the red. Withdrawing from that joint account wasn't an act of revenge. To an accountant, it was a necessity, cutting losses to preserve capital. That capital was my self-worth and the years I still had left. My new life in Florida is a diversified portfolio. I invest time in friends like Helen, who return dividends in laughter and companionship. I invest effort in volunteer work and receive the sense of being useful. I invest in art classes and earn the joy of creation. I no longer tie up all my resources in one risky stock. This afternoon, after the meeting, Helen and I will play bridge. She always grumbles that I overthink my moves. This is bridge, not a tax audit, Martha, she says. I just laugh. She's right, of course. But I also know it's that very habit of careful calculation that allowed me to balance the past and find this life of freedom. The balance sheet of my life is finally truly in balance.